Over the past 6 weeks, 3 of Unfound's disappearances have been resolved. Remains were located, and at this time there are no reasons to believe foul play is a factor. Today, I take a look at these 3 similar but also different cases to see how the resolutions can be applied to ones of the same type, because we have a ton of them. I'm Ed Densel, and this is Unfound. I should state, before I get too far into this, that those now resolved disappearances are of Chance Englebert, Jesse Farber, and Zach Carey. I will get into the specifics of each, if you've forgotten, and the analysis a bit later. But for now, I want to quickly explain why I decided to do this episode. What I want you to take away from today is this. If you'll remember, recently on Unfound, we covered the disappearance of Ian Rogers. The episode is called The Easiest of the Hardest. And that term came from something I once wrote to friend of the podcast, Julia Cowley. Why? Because cases where people go missing with vehicles are by any measure the easiest ones to bring to resolutions, for reasons that I've explained over and over. Well, then you might ask, well, then what is the next easiest of the hardest? Well, at least what should be the next easiest of the hardest? Well, I would answer disappearances like Chance's, Jesse's, and Zach's. The odds of foul play are not high. These people go missing on foot. The searches are usually done fairly quickly. There are no reasons to think these types of people are hiding from anybody. The odds of them running off and starting new lives are very low. Yet we have many like these in Unfound's catalog, and NamUs has to have at least 5,000 on its list of both men and women. But you can't tell because NamUs doesn't provide enough details to know. How can this be? All the elements are there to bring these cases to conclusions quickly. Yet many disappearances like these will never be solved. Where are the mistakes being made? Why are they being made? And who should be held accountable? That's what I'm going to do by looking at these 3 men, their circumstances, and what went on after. Because if we can't resolve these... But first, Unfound News. If you're in the discussion group on Facebook, then you now have access to the file explaining the Unfound database. And you also have access to a video on YouTube where I go through each category. Next, I'm about finished with the missing persons book from the UK. Overall, I'm not impressed. If you can believe it, it does not even have one section on disappearances that are believed to be murders. Finally, I'll be headed to Pennsylvania next week to see my dad. Not sure how long I will be there. Preparing for the cold now. Okay, so how this is going to go, I'm going to first go through all 3 of these disappearances. I'm going to go through some of the facts, not all of the facts, but some of the facts for each of them. I'm going to go over for each of them what the thinking was at the time from myself, from the guests, maybe from some of you, the important factors in each of these, and taking a look at what people believe happened. And then I will go through what I wrote on the Patreon blog, patreon.com/Unfound Podcast. And then for each of them, I will go over how each of these disappearances was resolved. And after all of that, I will get into, well, why did it take so long? Of course, like with Jesse's, it's been 10 years. With Chance's and Zach's, it's a much shorter period. But even with Chance's, it's been 6 years. So why is this, if I consider this to be, these kinds of disappearances to be the second easiest of the hardest? And what I mean by that is disappearances are the hardest mysteries to solve. Murders are not as hard to solve as disappearances. I will go to my grave saying that. So that's what I mean by this. And disappearances, people and their cars, as I've already stated, the easiest of the hardest. And these are the second easiest of the hardest. And I'll get into more of that and touch upon that as I go. I have notes in front of me. I do not have out any completed sentences except for the introductions that were used for each of these three disappearances. You know, the part that I read at the beginning of every episode. Everything else is just notes and me filling in the blanks with more words. All right, I'm going to start with, I'm going to go in the order in which they were featured on Unfound, not in the order that they historically happened. So Chance was the first of these. He was the first guy featured of the three on Unfound. And one more thing, given that these were resolved after the last update episode, all of these guys will be included in the next update episode at the end of December as well. But I think I'm going to start doing this. I don't know, I should have been doing this a while ago, taking a look and analyzing Unfound's disappearances on the actual Unfound podcast feed when they get resolved, and taking a look at, well, why did that happen? Instead of maybe just talking about it during the live show, maybe this should have been included a while ago in the presentation that I make with the podcast that comes out every Friday. All right, Chance Leslie Englebert was a 25-year-old from Moorcroft, Wyoming. He was a married father and was in the process of changing careers. On July 6th, 2019, while in Gering, Nebraska, Gering, Chance walked off after getting into a disagreement with his wife's family. An hour later, Chance was caught on video walking by himself. He was never seen again. And I should note, I think that not only was he just caught once on video, I actually believe that he was caught twice on video. Now, what I would like to add to that, some of the facts, and I did go back for all three of these and look at my notes that I took for these disappearances before they were presented on Unfound. Some of the points that I would like to add in Chance's is that before he left, he claimed that he was going to walk back to Wyoming. And keep in mind, he was in Nebraska. So it was going to be a little bit of a walk, but that's what he said. And it should be noted, unlike with Zach and Jesse, there is nothing in Chance's history that showed any histories of mental illness or drugs or alcohol or anything else. It very well may be he had one or two on him, beers in him or something like that. Very well may be on this day that this happened. But we have to remember, he's not a guy, I don't think, in his life who was prone to outrageous statements because of underlying issues with his mind or anything, or using substances that would cause that. So it's a little different than other disappearances, maybe when missing people have made outrageous claims, maybe like we'll get into with Jesse with his about the coyotes. This was a statement in my mind, looking at it, that should have been taken seriously because of this. Even as outrageous as it was, I think it should have been taken seriously. it's unclear to me how many people really, really took it seriously. So he said, well, I'm just going to walk back to Wyoming. And to get further into this, there was an argument. He's changing careers. Maybe what we might say stereotypical in-laws saying, hey, you have a wife, you have a family, you shouldn't be doing that. You should be... I've never been married, but I know that stuff exists out there, and often it goes nowhere. It seems in this place, this certain disappearance, it did go somewhere with tragic consequences, it seems. So once again, more than one camera caught Chance walking. There were no signs of him being followed. Did not seem to be on a specific path. I think he was going one direction, and then maybe turned around and went a different direction. I don't know why, but that's the way I remember the video. And I want to also add to the facts in going over this disappearance that his last message from his phone was kind of gibberish. It was a text. Gibberish. Was it like ampersigns and symbols instead of actual words? And in fact, there was a bad storm rolling in at the time of him walking off like this. And in fact, I called the episode one, The Wild Wind Blew. And he actually had called a friend asking to be picked up. This friend said that he could not make it. Once again, furthering my insight at the time of the coverage of this disappearance that Chance was serious about going back to Wyoming without his wife, without his child, one way or the other. There were searches done. Of course, nothing was found. To remind all of you, Dawn Englebert, his mother, was the guest. And I think if you go back and listen to that episode, you will see that, reading between the lines, that his family, at least his side of the family, Chance's biological family, believed that foul play was a very good possibility. I was not along those lines, but that's not uncommon. I oftentimes differ on theories from the guests. It's no big deal. I tell them what I think. They can go with it or they don't. But there was an idea. Could he have, seeing the storm, gone back to there and got back to the house, and the argument continued and something bad happened? I pretty much rejected that. So the Patreon blog that I write for every disappearance, I write my insights. As you know, don't really air my theories too often during the episodes. Just let the episodes play out, presented primarily by the guest. No foul play. And in fact, I did a map video where I thought it's very possible that he might have had it on Google Maps. And if he really was walking back to Wyoming, he might follow this particular map that would have taken him to a bridge over a river. Well, it turns out there's no bridge there. And I had the idea, did he try to cross that river anyway because the storm was coming and got washed away? That was my idea, of course, rejecting the idea of foul play. It doesn't seem that's what happened. Where his body ended up could not have been brought there by a river, overflowing river, or anything like that. And I don't think that where his remains were eventually found were near, even within a couple miles of where he might have, in my theory, he would have been trying to cross this river and failed. However, I do still, for myself, maybe I'm grading a little bit on a curve, I still do give myself getting this one right, because I did say that even if it did get swept away, that if his remains were found, they would be in the area, and this was not foul play. Of course, like I said, his family thought differently, thinking, and very common, and I'll get into this later. But, comparing his disappearance to the other two that I'll eventually talk about, he was the easily the least likely of these three guys to go missing. Didn't seem to have an alcohol problem, didn't have a drinking problem, no known enemies, I guess, until he started getting into an argument with his in-laws. Yet changes were happening in his life. That's something that needs to be considered, looking for a new direction in life. That certainly should have caused stress with him. And of course, a newborn baby, that is stress within itself. And then on top of that, his in-laws giving him problems. The stress is rising. And certainly, I think that was the main factor in this disappearance. Very well could have been the storm, too, walking out at the wrong time. But stress, not thinking clearly, anybody in that position, even though I took him seriously, still, anybody talking about walking back to Wyoming from there is not thinking clearly, even though I think that chance meant it. You can have it both ways like that. So the discovery by accident west of town, it's unclear to me if this was a reasonable area to search or not. So seemingly what happened here was that he walked off, intent, enraged, disgusted, everything else, not thinking clearly, walks out there, and something happens. I don't think that he had anything with him to commit suicide. Just shouldn't have been out there at that time. Maybe he tried climbing. There some mountain or something over there. And these things happen. And we know if he was walking through some, I don't know if you'd call it a forest, but where there were a lot of trees, the wind started blowing. If some limb got blown down, hit him, that's happening all the time. People out where they shouldn't be, in the woods or whatever in a storm, some rotted limb gets blown off, hits somebody. Those kinds of things are happening all the time. And so that is the disappearance of Chance Englebert. His disappearance went unresolved for about 6 years, solved by luck, or what we might also say, by accident. Next one, Jesse Farber. Once again, I'm going in the order in which they were featured on Unfound, but this is the oldest of the three. Jesse Lee Farber was a 29-year-old from Tamaqua, Pennsylvania. He was the father of two, and was a creative type. On the night of August 11th, 2015, Jesse called his girlfriend, telling her he was on a nearby mountain, that coyotes were after him, and to bring guns. The girlfriend and her brother immediately arrived at the location, but could not find Jesse. He was never seen again. Of course, the girlfriend was the guest. Her name was Rachel, and I've exchanged messages with Rachel a few times, even just coincidentally this past week. Not just about Jesse, but about another disappearance, a search and other investigations she's been involved in that I think is eventually going to be featured on Unfound from kind of this same area in Pennsylvania. Facts that I would like to add to that paragraph is he had some issues. There was, if you'll remember, there was a disagreement with his brother about rent money, which I think had put a little bit of a cloud of, is this possibly foul play or something like that going on. I think that kind of brought the foul play idea into his disappearance, even though I think at the time, I think Jesse's brother was only 17 or something like that. There was even a gang theory that I had in my notes, going back and looking at that. And of the three, when you look at these three, once again, Chance Englebert, Jesse Farber, and eventually I'll talk about Carey, I would put Jesse, as far as most likely to go missing, in the middle. I think Chance was the least likely of these three, just looking at the three before they went missing, the least likely to go missing. Jesse would be in the middle, and certainly Zach would have been the most likely to go missing of the three. Much like Chance's family, where, of course, his wife's family is saying we had nothing to do with this, whereas Chance's biological family thinking they did have something to do with it. Certainly there was a split in the people who cared about, there was a split with the people who cared about Jesse as well, with his mother and some others being on one side, Rachel and some others being on the opposite side. And I don't know if you picked that up. In retrospect, really tried to not get too much into that in the episode, but I'll just say that and move on. But that was certainly true. The area where he allegedly was, where he was allegedly making this call from, a tough area to search. However, things seemingly were found by his mother and others. And there was a sighting of him walking, I think earlier that day, by himself. And as I already read in the paragraph, he'd called Rachel saying, coyotes are after him, bring guns. He sounded freaked out. Who wouldn't be? He said where he was. And it does seem, now that this disappearance has been resolved, it does seem he was correct on where he was. Even though I'm pretty sure the coyotes were not after him. And it should be known, some people, when they heard the word coyotes, was it actually animal? Coyotes is also a name for people who smuggle people into the United States. And did he mean that? Some people actually put that out there. I don't know. If this were maybe in southern Texas, maybe that would make more sense and possibility. These are the mountains of Pennsylvania. It seems unlikely. So my insight at the time, in talking to Rachel, of course, with drugs and other things going on, anything is possible. Certainly there was some sort of mental issue going on, maybe brought on by drugs or some mental health issue, to bring up the coyote statement again. I also noticed that there's probably a little too much of, and you've heard me talk about this before, a little too much of that trying to make sense of what was surely an illogical situation. When you hear somebody, doesn't matter who it is, but they're talking about being chased by animals and other things that have come up in many unfound disappearances. It's always weird to me then when people start talking about, wouldn't it be logical for him to do this and wouldn't it be logical for her to do that? Are you not hearing that this person is not thinking sensibly, rationally, logically? So then why are you trying to look at it logically? At that point, what is going to help people out a lot more is looking at similar disappearances and knowing the statistics on such things. The problem is most people don't know that. And so they default to the part of their mind they use all the time, the logical part. I get that, but it's not helpful. I'm going to keep saying, not helpful. And like I said, he was of the three, the second most likely to go missing, but still, Jesse, in his current state, would have fallen into a high probability disappearance category. And for the Patreon blog, you will not be surprised by this, that, he disappeared on his own, and I had made the prediction that he would be found, unfortunately deceased, in the area near, where he was. I don't know why he would be dead or anything, but pretty sure. And that's exactly what happened. The discovery from, like I said, within the last couple months, I think it was hunters. I heard that it was not, deep in some brush. It was right along a path. Why the remains were missed. Remember, he went missing way back in 2015. Why the remains were missed for the last 10 years if they were seen by hunters. And we have to remember, hunters, for the most part, not crawling on their hands and knees through thorns and everything else. So why were Jesse's remains missed for the last 10 years? I don't know. But it was in the general area of where Jesse said he was on that night. There were multiple searches for him by all sorts of groups, including Rachel. And like I stated, it seems that some members of his biological family did find a couple of things connected to Jesse. And whether those were actual pictures that were posted of the things they found or not, I think is still in dispute. But still, the searches that were done on purpose to find Jesse were not successful. He, like Chance, found by accident or by luck, however you want to put it. Let's now take a look at the disappearance of Zach Carey. And that is a disappearance. Not only was the most recent one that we featured on Unfound, but it's a fairly new one in that it just occurred a little over 2 years ago. Zachary Carey was a 38-year-old from Evansville, Indiana. He came from a huge family and had been a welder. On May 30th, 2023, outside Linville, Indiana, Zach was with a longtime pal of his, riding around in that person's vehicle. This person says Zach got out and walked off into the woods. He was never seen again. Now, you can imagine just by reading that there was a foul play suspicion in this disappearance. And I think in general, I can see that. I can understand that. But it is interesting to me, on the other hand, that we take a look at the disappearance of Shanna Boydo, which was also resolved this year, where she ran off. And at least initially, and I will say early on in my disappearance career, I thought that was foul play. Of course, her disappearance did not end up being foul play. And what I think is interesting about that is that if there was ever one of these types of situations where two people are driving down the road and allegedly one of them runs off into the woods, Shanna, of course, understanding the relationship that Shanna and the guy in the car had and what was going on in their lives and everything, in general, just for layman's terms, it makes all the sense in the world that he would have killed her. The problem is, I'm not sure the statistics say that. And this is one of those hard lessons I have to learn, since this is what I do. This is not your job. It's my job. And I labored to get these things right. I did not get Shanna Boydo's right. Thought that he had killed her, and then created that story. In retrospect, what I should have looked at more, hindsight 2020, is that he called the police, or he called her father or something right away. And that should have told me something. That should have told me that, you know what, maybe this story is truer than I thought. So when we look at Zach's, and we have this story from this guy, Chris, who says that Zach went off into the woods, I realize a lot of people suspicious of Chris. I was not. So once again, this is one of the ways I've changed. Now, some of the additional items that are important in refreshing all of your minds about Zach's disappearance, and I would urge you, of course, to go back and listen to these episodes. I know they're not short, so it takes some time, but maybe when you have a chance, you can view them maybe in a new light now that you know they're all resolved. More information on mental health issues. It was not unusual for Zach to live in the woods for days, weeks at a time with nobody seeing him. Like I said, he had drug issues. He had job issues. He was a welder, and then the supervisor changed, and that caused an issue for Zach at that job. His phone was found near a roadside in the area, and it was just a simple, they were near Linville on this road, and Zach said, just leave me out here, and that's what Chris did. And it was Chris who said that Zach wanted to go for a ride. And what also should be known is this area in which this occurred, kind of like with Jesse Farber's disappearance. It's not an easy, if we're to take seriously the idea that Zach went into the woods, very much like Jesse, not the easiest area to search. My perception is at least Chance, that area around Gary, Nebraska, easier to search. But for Jesse and Zach, harder to search. And as I've already stated, of these three, Zach was most likely to go missing just looking at him as a person. And this is one where it seems that family and friends, unlike the other two, I don't think there was any real split here. A lot of people around Zach thinking that Chris did something, like I said, from a layman's point of view, from just the public general knowledge, I can see why this was the situation. My insight at the time is, once again, as I've already stated, at some point you do this all the time, you start to get the best thing, it's not really a feeling, but to keep it simple, you just kind of get a feel for these things. And the question I have started to ask myself in the last few years about certain kinds of disappearances of certain types of people, like Zach's. If Chris did something to Zach, this was his best story. And I should throw in here, remember Dwayne Thomas. This is another one where his family, of course, he's still missing, still unsolved. And his family certainly does not believe the story that his wife told about they stopped, pulled to the side of the road there in Arizona, and he walked off never to be seen again. And I am inclined to believe that's exactly what happened. As I have it written here in my notes, the reason, in addition, the other reason is that, Zach was going through a lot. Even much more in my insight than Jesse and Chance. And it's kind of seemed to me that he was on that trajectory of death anyway. And so then somebody turns around and kills him, even though it would be obvious to everyone around that maybe Zach was kind of headed for that, very tragically, very sadly, in that direction anyway. Somebody turns around and kills him. It seems unlikely. So you shouldn't be surprised. Those were my insights at the time. In patreon.com/Unfound Podcast, I wrote that I believe that Zach was in the woods, and that ended up being true. He also was found by accident in the general area of Linville, Indiana. Once again, right in the same zip code of where Chris said that he let him off. And I don't believe like Chris carried him into the woods or anything like that. That did not happen. So, but found in general where he was last seen. So my overall insights for all of these, and then I'll get into, why, like I said, if this is the second easiest of the hardest disappearances, why is it then that these guys, they're all in the general area of where they were last seen, and there were searches and dogs and everything done? Why did it take 10 years to find Jesse? Why did it take 6 years to find Chance? And why did it take over 2 years to find Zach? Why is that? I'm going to get into that eventually. But my overall insights is that, of course, like I've said, disappearances are about people, not circumstances. Yet, as you can see, these three guys, different men, living very different lives, yet people who are vastly different can create their own disappearances that are similar. Just because two people are vastly different. One's a teetotaler, never touched any drugs or anything like I've been in my life, it is possible for a person like myself to go missing kind of the same way that a person maybe living the opposite has done. And once again, it comes down to what else is going on in those people's lives. So once again, disappearances are about people, not circumstances, yet people who are vastly different can create their own disappearances that are similar to each other, as these 3 disappearances are. 3, of course, at least what I would say, to a variety of levels, 3 young men, and their minds aren't working right. Now, I realize the chance was not on drugs or anything, but rage, sadness, stress can have the same effects on your brain, just like drugs and alcohol can. So, but I will say, once again, overall insight, these are not difficult disappearances. I can go through a list of disappearances, at least 200 of Unfound's disappearances that are going to be or are way harder to solve than these ones. Way harder. Start picking them out. Of course, you'll probably pick out like Maura Murray. I don't think that one's... In fact, I think Maura Murray is very similar to these. My insight. But Dale Kerstetter and some others, way more difficult than these. Way more. These are not difficult disappearances. Yes, there were no facts to rule out many other theories than all 3 ended up being. However, the track record is clear on these types of disappearances with these types of people. Foul play is not the most likely choice. It is not the best choice. It just isn't, if you really pay attention to this stuff. With people on drugs, people are stressed out, people making comments like, I'm going to walk back to Wyoming. These are not disappearances that usually end up being foul play. They just aren't. So, and overall insight, once again, I want to state, I was 3 for 3 on these, despite each of my guests, and I think highly, maybe many of you thinking that foul play should have been considered. Not to brag, but this is, like I said, this is the work I do. I labor to get these things right. So I'll go back to now where I started, the second easiest of the hardest. So then, if so, why are these so often solved by accident, by luck, by hunters, by hikers? If it's really unlike maybe what I call the easiest of the hardest with cars and rivers, those are solved on purpose. Those are scuba teams going out there looking in particular areas. They are looking for missing people and missing cars and are finding them. Whereas with these ones, as far as looking at what the people and what has happened, it's like, well, these people should be right. They shouldn't be far away. It's kind of like a Jason Landry situation, of course, still unsolved. They should be right there. Then what is the problem when you make concerted efforts to find these people and these searches fail? How can you say these are the second easiest of the hardest? Well, I'm going to get into that right now. So I've come up with many reasons, and I'm going to start with this one because it is the most novel of them, and this is certainly something that nobody has ever brought up in the history of looking at disappearances and search theory and all of that. Some of you have heard this before. I don't know if how deep I've gotten into it in any particular episode that comes out on Fridays, but certainly I've talked about it in the Patreon blog and in the live show that I do on YouTube and Facebook on Monday nights. And it's called the Lost Disc Theory of Disappearances. This is, I think, a psychological factor that figures greatly into why people like Zach, Jesse, and Chance aren't found. It goes like this, and many of you know that I'm a disc golf player, but anybody who's been playing disc golf for any length of time, maybe not the first day, but at least for a month, has thrown a disc. Probably, most courses are kind of wooded or have bushes. This is not ball golf where, the fairway is all nicely mowed and everything. We play in the woods. We play in bushes and all sorts of, public parks and things like that. Most courses are on public land. Not very many private land disc golf courses out there, at least in the United States. But you throw a disc down there, let's say 200 feet, so two-thirds the length of a football field. And it goes and maybe it curves a little bit, and there's some trees and bushes and everything down there. And you may even be playing with friends. Let's say there's 3 of you. And you see where the disc went. You go down there, and let's say it's a fluorescent pink disc. And like I said, this has happened to anybody who's been playing disc golf for even just a month. You throw the disc, you throw it 200 feet, you kind of see it go out. You have your sight turned a little bit, went behind a bush or something. And you think, well, I'm going to go walk down there and I'm going to find it right away. I mean, it's, the ground is brown and green, the trees are brown and green, and I just threw a hot pink disc. It's going to be right there. I'm going to be easy to see. You go down there and you don't see it. Like I said, happens. I'm sure it happens thousands of times in the United States every day with disc golfers. And so you're like, well, what happened here? There's bushes and there's logs and whatever else. And you're all looking around and, your buddies are looking all over, walking. Well, we saw it. It went right here. All 3 of us saw it. It landed right here. Where did it go? It just went around this bush. Where did it go? And I myself have had this happen, where I've thrown a disc not that far. You go down there, can't find it. You'll be there for a half hour, cannot find it, even though you saw it fly right into that bush where you are looking. It's like it's supernatural. That's how you feel at the time. It's like, did it get beamed up? Did it go into a wormhole? What the heck happened? So after a while, you're like, well, man, it's getting late. We're spending more time looking for this disc than actually playing, and you have to move on. So you've lost that disc. And your name's on it, the phone number's on it, and you think, well, maybe somebody else will find it or whatever. But you're thinking, well, if we can't find it, who else is going to be able to find it? So you play the rest of your round, maybe even forgetting that you even lost that disc. But inevitably, there are people who will keep discs and they shouldn't do that. But most of the time, a few days later, a week later, 10 days later, you'll forget that you even threw that disc. You'll forget that you even lost that disc. You'll have played 3 times since then, forgot you even had that disc on. You'll just forget it. And then all of a sudden, your phone will ding or whatever else, and you'll look at it, and it's a text from somebody saying with a picture of that disc. And because the person's a good person, sees your name on it, sees your phone number on it, they're texting you, hey, I found your disc. How can I get it back to you? This is a very common thing within the disc golf community, and that's why it's so great. Now, here's the thing that I think goes through a lot of players' minds. I know that when it happened to me, it's happened many times over the years, I think the same thing. How is it that I threw the disc? I was there that day. In fact, other people were there with me that day, saw me throw the disc. They know what color it is and everything else. We all went down there, looked for it, could not find it for a half hour. Whereas some person who doesn't know me, doesn't know I played disc golf, doesn't know I was there that day, doesn't know that I even threw a disc on that particular hole, doesn't know anything about me, knows nothing, zero. When I went down and looked for the disc, I had way more information than that person did, but that person found the disc, and I and my friends didn't. How is that possible? But I'm telling you, it happens all the time. And I've had a long chance to think about it, and then I started playing disc golf in like 2011, 2012, and of course I didn't start Unfound until 2016, and it wasn't until maybe 2021 or 2022 that I came up with this idea that I'm telling you about right now, where I could intertwine the idea of losing discs on the disc golf course and then getting them back from strangers and people going missing. Actually missing, like Zach, Jesse, and Chance, and being able to see a similarity between the two. This is just how my mind works. So how is that possible? Because you can see the similarity for disappearances like these three. Especially, when we're, talking about Jesse, who actually called his girlfriend Rachel and said, "Hey, I'm here. This is what's going on. Come get me. Come bring guns." And we had the phone information, and that's where his phone pinged. She went out there. Another guy went out there. Many, many people went out there. Couldn't find him. And then somebody comes along 10 years later. A group comes along. Doesn't even know Jesse Farber's missing. Maybe doesn't know none of these people know even the first thing about disappearances, period. And these people find Jesse instead. How is that possible? Shouldn't it be the person who has the most information is most likely the one to solve the disappearance or find the missing person or find the missing disc? It's generally so, but it's not technically so. Why? It's crazy. So I hope you're sticking with me to this point, because like I said, everything that I'm saying to this point is absolutely true. And it's still creepy to this day when I lose a disc somewhere, can't find it in the bushes, then a week later somebody texts me, "Hey, I found your disc." How is that possible? I think it's this. The fact is, sometimes you can just have too much information. And, just to keep this simple with disc golf, I think that when you cannot deny what you saw, and it certainly happened, because what happens is, from a lot of experience, you throw the disc, you go down there, you're looking for it, and then somebody will say, "Well, maybe it kicked off this tree, or maybe it did that and did this roll," and so you start looking outside of the area where you saw it hit. But then the logical side of your mind takes over and says, "Oh, no, what are you doing? You know what your eyes saw. You need to come back to that area. It's here." And it very well may be that, you're only looking like 20 or 30 feet away, but that is enough to then kick into your mind, "Hey, you're looking in the wrong spot." And so what I'm saying is, sometimes knowing where that disc landed limits your imagination when it comes to searching for that disc. And it actually at some point, not right away, not in the first minute, and I don't know what the time limit would be, but at some point, you not being able to forget what you saw actually becomes a hindrance to you finding the disc. That's the only explanation I can come up with, because how is it then that somebody who doesn't know anything comes in and finds it? They are totally clueless. They find it. You have all the information. You can't find it. So when it comes to these searches, it very well may be that people get too caught up in the facts, in the pings, in what people have said, what Chris said, these videos that were for Chance, the ping for Jesse. You can get too caught up in that. And you start straying away from that. And probably maybe you should, if only maybe a quarter mile this way or a quarter mile that way. But you start thinking, no, he's here. This is what the ping said. This is what this witness said. This is what the video said. This. And it limits people's imaginations. This is the lost disc theory of disappearances. And I have it written in my notes. Sometimes believing where a person went missing can hurt the overall search. And you may say, but Ed, we've heard disappearances where the searches have gone many, many miles in all these different directions. They're not letting, their imaginations get, well, at that point, though, the math starts taking over. And in fact, these people are kidding themselves. Well, we searched 10 miles in every direction. No, you didn't. There's no way you look at the square miles and how many people you had and everything that you did an adequate search. That's what your conscience is telling you. That's not factual. So this is the first reason I think that when we go looking for people like Jesse, Zach, and Chance, that these searches failed. Now, it very well may be, with Chance, maybe they didn't have as good an idea as where to look. Very possible. But this is a big reason that I think that many searches out there fail. And it can, you've heard me talk about this, and certainly in your own disappearance reading, you have, heard about, well, this person went missing 20 years ago. There were many searches. And what do you know? Today they came upon this missing person by accident. How is that possible? You don't even need to bring any of Unfound's disappearances into it. I know just in your own reading, you've come across that. How is that possible? So that's one of the reasons. Now, what can you do about that? Is there a way to combat this? Now, I would say with disc golf, we want to bring it just down to the local level where nobody has to, die or disappear or anything. If we want to just go back to the, disc golf, I think one of the ways that, you combat that is if you play the same courses over and over and over. Of course, that's going to be hard for disappearances, but in disc golf, I know for myself, there are a few courses that I play, like Taylor, like Maximo, like Clearwater, or like Cliff Stevens, and even some outside of the area that I've, going down to Sarasota, where when a disc is flying and it goes out of sight, I've seen a disc fly in that direction so many times that I think, yep, I know where it's going to go. And you should know I'm a pretty good finder of discs. Well, I think you can apply that also to disappearances. But the problem is nobody keeps any records, really, really technical records on searches for disappearances and things. I realize there's this PDF file out there that they did a study some years ago in Arizona, and even in this book that I'm reading from the UK that I don't think very highly of it, they do some things into studies about where missing people are found and everything. But what is more helpful is not knowing just that, well, most people are found within a mile. How about knowing some specific disappearances where somebody goes missing, man or woman, child, whatever, and you know the resolution and you can tap into that in your mind and saying, hey, the search that I'm on right now really reminds me of that disappearance that I know about from 23 years ago, kind of the same terrain, but it's in a different state, kind of the same person. How was that one resolved? Where was that person? That is more helpful than just saying, well, we just need to search in a 1 mile radius of the area. But if that's all you got, then that's all you got. I think that would combat this, I think. So that's one of the reasons I think that these kinds of disappearances, even though I consider them to be the second easiest of the hardest, that a lot of people are out there making these disappearances harder than they need to be. The next reason, I think, is that the public, including the families, not understanding why people go missing. Too often, too many people connected to the person, not connected to the missing person, allow their emotions to get in the way. They want someone to blame. And ultimately, it clouds the issue. And I believe what happens is that searchers, volunteers, or whoever, if they're also thinking the same way, why are we out here looking for John Doe when the family, here in these woods, when the family seems to think that it's foul play and he's not in these woods, what are we doing? That doesn't help a good search. That is negative. That's a psychological factor that is going to make the search a lot worse than it can be. And this is a reason, getting into Chance's disappearance, Jesse's disappearance, Zach's disappearance, that families should really keep that kind of thinking. Granted, they very well may be right, but for disappearances like these ones, they're most likely going to be wrong. But if you start letting it out there that we believe it's foul play and there might have been something going on and that Chance's in-laws are lying, that Chris is lying, that, Jesse went missing because of rent or the gang or anything else, this totally undermines search efforts. Totally. Psychologically, and then on top of that, my belief is that you're going to get less people showing up for searches. Why should we search up on that mountain or in these woods or whatever when you don't even believe the story that he could be anywhere? I think what happens, and I can't speak for any of these families specifically, but I would say in general, I think that they put that out there because they think that that's going to get more attention for the disappearance. Well, it will, but it's certainly, one step forward, 2 steps back. Certainly. Especially, once again, for these kinds of disappearances of these people, these kinds of people, and then you combine that with the circumstances. You start putting out there's foul play. In contrast to Jody Huisentruit, where it's obvious that there was foul play. And in fact, if somebody were out there, oh, this wasn't foul play, Jody staged the whole thing. What would everybody think? Well, that's crazy. This is kind of not as drastic. It's kind of the same thing. It's undermining. The opposite can also be true. If you're out of order and saying Jody Huisentruit wasn't really abducted, she staged her own disappearance, then you're kind of out of order the same way when you start saying that these types of people with these types of disappearances, that's foul play. It's kind of the same thing. You're undermining, the process. And so every little bit matters, even if on the fringes, that causes these disappearances to be unsolved. And I think, like I said, I think the reason that families do this is because if they just come out, if they were to listen to me and say it's probably not, they're afraid if they come out and say, well, we don't believe this is a, foul play. We believe that he's just out in the woods and he was going through this and going through that, it's just not going to get as much attention. You know what? Unfortunately, you're probably right. But at least you know if you get people showing up to search that they're invested in it. And their minds are totally on, okay, this is why we're here. In contrast to, well, here we're out here. It's raining. It's cold. What am I even doing here? Whereas the family's saying, well, they don't even believe he's out here. It's foul play and he's somewhere else. What are we doing? I think this is a huge part of these types of disappearances as well. Another insight into this, why is it that there are rewards for and you know that I realize, yeah, as you all know, maybe by this time, you know that I don't believe that rewards work. Rewards don't solve disappearances. And in fact, I'm at the point in my disappearance and missing persons career now, as soon as I hear somebody say, I'm going to offer a reward. We offered a reward. This private investigator wants to offer a reward. This podcast wants to offer a reward. This rich person wants to offer a reward. I know all of these people know nothing about disappearances at all. Zero. Automatic. It's automatic. It is absolutely automatic. Now, on the other hand, what don't you hear? And this is, I'm just kind of thinking out loud. Why is it that no rewards are actually ever offered for finding the missing person in disappearances such as these? Now, I will admit, I think in that situation, a reward might work. If people knew that they go out into those woods and search it, and they're going to get paid to do that, you know what? You're going to get a lot of searchers showing up. You find Zach Carey, you find Chance Englebert, you find Jesse Farber, you will be amazed how many people will show up to do that. And that's what you really need. You need manpower and woman power, person power. And what do a lot of these searches, what they get? A lot of people showing up. So I can't figure out why it's okay to offer rewards for information, and we know that doesn't work. We know the history of it. We know it doesn't work. But nobody seems to offer any rewards. You know what? You show up, you find the missing person, we're going to give you $5,000. Is there some law against that? I really don't know. But it seems that would be much more constructive than what we're doing right now with disappearances. It seems. Because in addition, what I want to add on into this, also in this category, is that, no, I'll leave that until a little bit later. That'll be the next topic. But if you want people to show up, just tell them, it's like a treasure hunt. And treat it as a treasure hunt. I know it seems funny, and I don't know like I said, it might be illegal. I don't know. Maybe there is. It's certainly not immoral. Is it unethical? I don't know. But that seems like a much better way. If there is somebody out there who wants to throw money at an unresolved disappearance, is that not better? I realize that means you could get people just showing up there at any time, and I realize there would have to be a little control to this. But you'd be amazed how many people are going to show up to do a search, and if they find remains of the missing person, they know they're going to get paid. That sounds like a good use of money to me. In contrast to when it's just, as we know, information leading to the discovery of John Doe, what do you get? Psychics and palm readers and numerologists and a bunch of kooks. Whereas I think that if you were actually offering money for remains, or maybe the missing person's alive, maybe that works too. It just seems to me to be more constructive. So I think that's another reason. Money that is out there that can help, that is being earmarked for disappearances, of course, like I said, doesn't work the way we currently do it. Can we not find a better way to use that money? I think so. Now, my next point, I was going to talk about it a couple minutes ago, but I'll talk about it now. The other reason that I think these kinds of the second easiest type of the hardest disappearances to solve is because there are no consequences for being wrong. I am a true believer. This is why I'll continue to say that I labor so much to get these disappearances correct and making predictions and wanting to be right. Because I know that if I'm wrong and I'm right enough, if you're expecting me to be perfect all the time, then you're expecting too much. But I know if I'm making predictions and only getting the predictions right 25% of the time, I believe I should be held accountable for that. That's my belief. That's just how I go about my life. The problem we have is that a lot of people who end up getting involved in these disappearances, these types of disappearances, where it seems like searching is a good choice and this, that. And we get a lot of people who have failed over and 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 over, and still they're involved. Why is that? Why, for example, do dog handlers get picked over and over and over when their dogs have never shown any ability to logically, find a missing person, whether alive or deceased? And are we sure even when those dogs find these remains or whatever, that it's just not luck? Why do we do that? There should be penalties for failing. I'm not saying legal penalties. I'm not saying throw these people in jail or fine them or anything. But if they're not going to succeed in going out and looking for Zach, Jesse, and Chance, then why do they keep getting called? We need to add in, some incentive here. You fail, we just don't call you anymore. And maybe, once again, maybe that's where that reward money that seems to exist for a lot of these disappearances, maybe that's where the money should go. You know what? You show up, your dog finds the missing person, here's what you get. But if you fail, well, you're probably not going to get called. Maybe we'll give you a chance somewhere down the road. Maybe you can retrain your dog or try a different dog. You can do this, you can do that. But maybe for next time, you're just not going to do it. And you may say, well, if that's going to be the situation, then nobody's going to have any dogs that go out and sift for anybody. You know what? Fine by me. Because they don't find missing people anyway. Why are we so intent on being supportive of something that doesn't work? You know why I think? I think it's just because we like dogs. If it were snakes or tarantulas, which is a spider if you don't know, or animals like that, I don't know if would be feeling the same way. I think for most people would be like, that snake didn't find that missing person, get that snake out of there. But because it's a dog, there's that connection between humans and dogs. I think that we are more likely to give dogs, and thus their handlers, a lot more leeway. That is wrong. There needs to be penalties for failure. And I would say that for private investigators too. And like I said, I keep track of my predictions on the results of disappearances. I'm like in 90-some percentile. There is no dog out there in the 90th percentile. Not even close. There's no private investigator out there in the 90th-some percentile. But that's what I'm laboring to do. Why do these people keep getting called over and over and over? Being that there's no penalties for being wrong, They have no interest in being right. That's just human nature. That's just human nature. Whereas, I don't know what makes me different. And I know there are other people out there like myself who take this stuff very seriously and want to get it right. But we have to wonder about the integrity of people who know that they are failing in the jobs that they are required to do, but keep showing up, and it doesn't seem they're trying to do anything to improve their knowledge, their education, their experience, or anything else. They just keep showing up. It's the same person showing up and failing. Why do we accept that? Why do we? You families out there, you shouldn't accept that. Don't do it. I don't care if they're not getting paid or not, or whatever they're doing, pro bono or whatever else. Don't accept it. That's how this stuff, one more way, this is going to get figured out. It's no different than a business. If you're a restaurant, you want to stay in business, you got to find a way to be profitable, good food, good waiters, good cooks, good waitresses, good bartenders, and everything else. The way we do this for disappearances, as far as searching and the investigation of them, our restaurant wouldn't last a week. What are we doing? There has to be penalties for failure. Like I said, not going to jail or anything, but you're just not asked to be involved anymore. You're not helpful. You're not moving. Horrible sports cliche. You're not moving the ball down the field. Why are you on the field? You shouldn't be on the field. Moving on. And the final point on this is the police. The problem is, I know it for all these three disappearances with Zach, Jesse, and Chance, it's very bittersweet. I fully realize that all of their families and friends, anybody who cared about them, were hoping all three of these guys would be alive. Me included. I'll make predictions and I'll say I think this person's, deceased and they're probably out there. But trust me, if I end up being wrong and the person is alive, I'll be fine with it. I'll be fine. Just like I was wrong, like, for example, with Brandon Roberts. The problem we have with this is that, police read the news too. Getting to this point. And remember, for all three of these disappearances, the police had no part in the discovery of these remains. What does that teach the police? Well, it'll eventually get solved. Some hunter, some hiker, this doesn't help them. So when it comes to filling out the paperwork, John Doe went missing. He stormed off from his house after having a fight with his in-laws. And what's going to happen? The police are going to think, maybe if a police officer does have that Rolodex up there and says, Chance Englebert found, by accident in 2025. So, we'll just wait it out. We'll just take a wait and see attitude. This is also what can happen. This all combines into one big ball of bad. All of this, from, like I said, the disc golf theory of disappearances, the public and not understanding why people go missing too often, defaulting to foul play, the bad use of money for rewards for information instead of rewards for results. People who get involved from the outside who fail, but they still keep getting called. And then with the police, themselves, who actually fill out the reports, who, as we say, have the power of the state. They have the power to serve warrants. They have the power to interrogate people. They have the power, if somebody lies to them, that's a crime. On stuff that nobody else, no other organization in the United States has. Well, the last thing you want for them is to then also have that wait-and-see attitude of, we'll just wait around. And, Zach, Jesse, and Chance will eventually be found by accident, so we don't have to do anything. Meaning the more we wait, it's one of those things where the more we wait for good accidents to happen, the more everyone will just wait for good accidents to happen. The problem is they aren't guaranteed to happen. And I will continue to say it's very sad. There are many disappearances that I've already featured on Unfound that will never be solved. And some of them will be exactly like the 3 that I'm talking about today. Because too many people waiting around, waiting for something good to happen, including the police. And yes, at least with 2 of these guys, it very well could have been the stigma. Well, Zach, problems here, problems there. Jesse, this, that, he's, talking about coyotes. Well, he's some crazy guy. Do we really have to go and do this? With Chance, maybe that wouldn't have as much have been the case. Too many of these look at, for all the 40-some disappearances that have been resolved to one point or another in Unfound's catalog, how many of them have been solved by accident? Most. This is Esther Westenbarger, luck. Crystal Morrison, luck. Daniel Villarreal, luck. These 3, luck. Whereas some that weren't, although, we could talk about Zoe Campos, almost her murder wasn't solved at all. Andrea Bowman, not necessarily luck, but I could say on the other hand, we're very lucky that Dennis, unfortunately for that woman's family from 1980, she was murdered. If he doesn't murder that woman in 1980, probably Andrea Bowman's disappearance is still unsolved. Tyler North, not luck. I guess we're just lucky that his ex-wife and her boyfriend are horrible criminals. So when we start looking at good police work when it comes to disappearances, we're 40-some solutions in, and I don't think any of them have had overtly good police work. And they had to rely on luck or something tangential to luck for them to be resolved. And I think, once again, I think one of the reasons is it's just too many already having been solved by luck, and police are more than happy to let that happen. So that's, I think, all of that put together. What percentages you want to put on each one of those points that I just brought up, 4 or 5. What percentage, the pie chart, if you're looking at a pie chart of this, how big is each slice? I don't know. But I'm pretty sure it's all of these. And it very well may be more. These are some of the ones that keep coming to my mind. And that's why they're being detailed in this episode. So I think the conclusion, what I'm trying to say here, is that these particular 3, and this is nothing necessarily against any person who went out there into the woods or anything trying to find these people. None of these had to be unsolved as long as they were. I will continue to say that. Once again, I'm not here to undermine anybody, but I think that everybody can do better, including myself. Now, what role do I play? I'm trying to point the people who do this in the right direction. That's what I'm trying to do. Not sure that they're listening, but I get these people who happened upon Zach, Jesse, and Chance. Thank you for being observant, and thank you for, I know it's all luck. Thank you for being in the right place at the right time. But there's just a lot of improvements. As I continue to say, we're continuing to try to solve these disappearances as if it's the 1950s. All sorts of other types of investigations have changed and improved, everything. and except for cell phone information, not much else has changed. And even when it comes to cell phone information, I mean, we had it for Chance, we had it for Jesse at least. It seemingly didn't help that much. So every little bit counts, but that's what I wanted to talk to you about today. So this was the tale of 3 cases. And that's the program. I'm Ed Dunsel, and you've been listening to Unfound.